Good evening. I'm here in a nice County Kildare. I'm about to do a talk here tonight on paganism and how paganism actually survived. It'll be up on YouTube. Don't worry, it's coming. But nothing beats seeing a talk in the flesh. Now, why am I making this video? Well, a while back I made a YouTube video about how Hammer films, mainly through the work of the likes of Dennis Wheatley, have blown the whistle on occult practices within respectable society within the British establishment and British military. Now, today, in 2018, well, this year, is the 50th anniversary of Hammer's best film, and it was also Christopher Lee's favourite film that he starred in, The Devil Rides Out. The Devil Rides Out is a masterpiece of English folk horror. It's one of the best Hammer films and one of the best movies of the 60s. Now, it takes place in basically London and also in the rural home counties. Essentially, the story is Christopher Lee is an occult expert, a kind of a nun-vampire hunting version of Van Helsing. Comes across the work of what they call a satanic or a black magic occult circle of aristocrats working out of a country house in England who are basically invoking the devil. In fact, the film shocked me as a child and shocked many other people because it showed a depiction of a devil-like being in the film itself, and that was incredibly radical for the time. The goat of Mendes, the devil himself. But it wasn't. It was really Pan. But there's always been a very interesting sort of myth around the film, saying that the main character of Makato, who's, I forget the actor's name, fantastic performance, was based on Crowley. Crowley as Dennis Wheatley, who wrote the novel The Devil Rides Out, based him upon. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. In terms of having a coven or an occult circle, it probably is based on Crowley. But Crowley was not an aristocrat, and this is one of the myths you get in this truth movement. It's one of the reasons you can't educate them. They seem to think that Crowley was connected to the royals and was connected to the establishment. Crowley was not an aristocrat. He came from a family that made their own money. Crowley was not part of the establishment. They hated him and they did everything to destroy him all his life. So these people who say things like Crowley was like one of the royals or an insider or part of the establishment, he wasn't. All the people he moved with were all misfits in British and other American society. He basically had destroyed even his chance of being a part of the Bohemian sect with the famous Battle of Blythe Road, where he went into the Golden Dawn's temples and did the inverted sign of the pentagram and muttered some incantations towards the Irish poet and the head of the Golden Dawn in London at the time, temporarily, W.B. Yeats. It's kind of a funny story because Yeats and a bodyguard kicked Crowley out like it bounces out of a pub. But that's how that whole antagonism between this magical war between Crowley and Yeats began. But there was antagonism before then. Crowley was probably jealous of Yeats' genius as a poet and also his ability to reach a massive audience with poetry, which is essentially esoteric and occultic in nature. Crowley was not as powerful as the character Makato in the film The Devil Rides Out. So to say it's based on Crowley, only superficially is it based on Crowley. However, I've no doubt that it was based on some others aristocrats whose names we'll never hear, who took part in all these kinds of rituals, and indeed where women and children were sacrificed to entities like the Goat of Mendes or whomever their old ones tended to be. Crowley certainly wasn't of that league. He didn't have the money, he didn't have the power, he didn't have the prestige, and he certainly didn't have the influence, and they all thought he was riffraff anyway. It's interesting about the magical war between Crowley and Yeats. Crowley probably won it in the end. I'll tell you why. Yeats, although he became one of the most famous poets that ever lived, the National Poet of Ireland, he won the Nobel Prize. We don't even know if his grave in Sligo contains his bones. He died during an epidemic around the time of the Second World War, and when the war was over, his bones were just randomly shipped back. There could be any bones or only one or two of his bones in his own grave. And Crowley at this point has basically been more successful. He has the whole world you live in today culturally is basically based on what Crowley put forward in Thelema and the Book of the Law. So look out for The Devil Rides Out, and look out for lots of other Hammer films, especially the ones that are the English folk horror type tradition. The Devil Rides Out, To the Devil a Daughter, very good film actually, very dark, and actually it was so dark they actually edited many scenes out of it. Christopher Lee and Nastasha Kinski. There's lots of them. My mind is just like a bit closed off now. I'm busy and going off somewhere else. But you can look them up. Demons of the Mind, one I highly recommend. A kind of a Freudian horror story, and a very terrifying, dark, and difficult one to watch about a serial killer called Straight On Till Morning. But anyway, I would start, if you want to watch the film The Devil Rides Out. It's half century old now. It's a fantastic piece of English folk horror. It's Hammer's famous moment, and quite rightly, I think next, along with The Wicker Man, it's Christopher Lee's finest performance. And have a good evening. I'm off to see my public.